I want to go ahead and get started with a title that is probably real clickbait title for sure. The Chaos We Need. That sounds like the opposite of what we would think when we think about chaos, because it's never a good thing. It's always a bad thing. So why would we need something negative? Why would we need something bad? Before I explore it, and I'm going to explore it, I've been wrestling with this thought for months, some things that are going to come out today. And I didn't even really get clarity on some of them until this weekend. So I knew it was one of those things that even if we walked in here and there was no one able to show up, I had to record this message. I had to say this because it's just one of those things that I've been working over mentally and spiritually, and I feel like I've started to walk into an answer. So I want to explore it together with you. Before I do that, I want to put a little salad, what I like to call a little salad in front of the steak. A little thought that I had in the midst of this whole thing that's going on that I think will dovetail into our word today, but even if it just stands on its own, it's worth thinking about. And so I just wrote a little paragraph and then one verse I want to attach to it, and it's us versus them is the operating system of the principalities and powers of the nations of the world. And I quote us versus them think of that as a way of life, as a way of thinking, which is our group versus their group, our party versus their party, our side versus our idea versus theirs, our nation versus them. That's the us versus them. When the Bible in the New Testament talks about the principalities and powers of the air, I don't any longer think of that in terms of a bunch of invisible demons flying around. Some people do, and they really want to take you to task on that. I'm not really interested in that argument. To me, the powers and principalities of the air are the invisible forces of a system. And the real operating system of that system is us versus them. It's a polarizing thought. It's one way versus another way. It's in the natural kingdom. And by the natural kingdom, I don't mean monkeys and giraffes. I mean, it's in the kingdoms of the world. It's how the world functions. It's how they operate. Us versus them is not only political or financial, it's even religious. Our religion versus their religion. Our denomination versus their denomination. Our way of doing things versus their way of doing things. Until we become so polarized, almost into these miniature camps of thought. It has no place in the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God literally does not dwell in the realm of us versus them. In fact, we are in, and I put these in quotes for those that just listen and don't see it, but we are, quote, in, but we are not, quote, of. We've all said that so many times in Christianity. We'll say, we're in the world, we're not of the world. What do we mean by that? Well, in a nutshell, what we mean is we live in a system, but we're not a part of that system. We live in this world and its kingdom, but aren't a part of that. Rather, we are both us and them. That's the kingdom of God. Not polarizing, us versus all of those people. It's really us in the kingdom and them in this world. We're all one people in the eyes of God with different ways of functioning. That's the principles of our kingdom. As far as the people, there's no us versus them. There's no good guy, bad guy. There's God's children, and there's people that have woke up to the identity that they're God's children. Jesus says this, and this is part of the Trilogy Prayer, what I always call the Trilogy Prayer of Jesus, which is where Jesus prays for himself, then Jesus prays for his disciples, then Jesus prays for us. It's a inner, outer, and then beyond space and time prayer. So you can read John 17 that way. You can watch that unfold. This is in the praying for his disciples. I'm no longer in the world, but these are in the world. It's an interesting way of saying that because he's in the world. He's standing there. Yet he's praying because he's going to the cross. So he's praying to his Father, there's a time coming, I'm not going to be in the world, but my disciples are in the world. Notice where they are. In it. And I come to you, Holy Father, keep through your name these whom you've given me, that they may be one as we are. So think about the phrase in the world from the first line. Where are the disciples? In the world. What did we say a moment ago? We're in but not of, right? So they're in, and I'm praying, Father, keep them through. Think about these two things, these two prepositions, in and through. Whatever we are in, Jesus has prayed that we make it through. Now, I know he's talking specifically to the disciples in his room, but the prayer's the same. He's not praying something for them that he doesn't mean for you. Like, I want you to get my disciples through it, but forget about those people 2,000 years later. That's not the heartbeat of the Father. There's no preference with Jesus, all right? There's no preferential treatment. This is why we don't see Christ in the new covenant dealing differently. We don't see Christ post-resurrection dealing differently with Israel than he is with the Gentile nations. So he doesn't have a preference of people. So this prayer for them is a prayer for us. Whatever we're in, Jesus prayed that we make it through. Now I want you to notice this, because this is really where the wrestling starts. This prayer does not find fulfillment in the disciples being delivered from everything, because the disciples were not delivered from everything. Some of them will lose their head, literally, for the cause of Christ. Some of them will be imprisoned and beaten and shipwrecked and striped and you name it. And they'll lay their lives down because they believe the King's alive, and that's worth dying for. They don't get delivered from it. Some things, yes, but not all things. So this prayer, if you look at a successful Jesus prayer as they're supposed to make it through all of their problems, well, then he failed, or the Father failed, or he didn't listen to Jesus, or we need to take a different approach. This prayer doesn't find fulfillment in them being delivered from everything. This prayer finds fulfillment in them maintaining unity no matter what falls upon them. No matter what hell they go through, there's a kingdom they believe in that comes out the other side. That even if the individual members of the kingdom fall to persecutions and betrayals and assassination and whatever, the kingdom continues to go along no matter what hell throws at it, no matter how bad the kingdoms of the world get in. And in Jesus' day, think in terms of Rome, which is now, it's just history to us. But in Jesus' day, think in terms of no matter what Rome does, no matter how bad Rome gets and how vicious Caesar falls upon the church, no matter how many Peter, Paul, James, and Johns die, John actually makes it in that individual scenario. But no matter how many of them fall, Kingdom of Christ keeps rolling. Church keeps rolling. How does it keep surviving? The fall of the biggest names, that'd be tough in modern society. It's like if the biggest names fall, they're like, we've lost our confidence. Everything else falls because the big names fall. But in the kingdom, the big names of the early church fall, and the kingdom keeps rolling because Jesus prayed that no matter what, they make it through.